I ask that you'll just bear with me. There's no better way to pay tribute to Michael. So I met Michael as a fellow professional. It was during the COVID period. And I didn't know the Michael the celeb. Because if I had known Michael celeb, I would not move close to him because I don't like public people, attention, that's not my thing. But I remembered that we were neighbors in South B. And the only moment I remembered of Michael was when the mom had passed on. And their gate was open and we lived directly opposite. So when I mentioned to Michael that I remember you from South B, he insisted that we need to meet. Just to take you back and give you context, Michael had come out of a wilderness moment, which had taken some years. If you don't know wilderness, nione you may attend, I will explain. I had equally come out of wilderness moment, and I had told God, me and your sons, that is not something I want to explore anymore in my life. And a pastor friend of mine had come in 2021, New Year, and insisted that we pray over my New Year resolutions. And he insisted that we needed to pray for a spouse. And I was very elusive about that. And so he asked me, okay, just mention a month that you might be ready. And I threw in the month of October. God, I can meet your son in October. For now, I just want to enjoy my life. And I did. And so the first time I met Michael in person was 1st of October. And when he invited me, I actually thought I was going as a therapist. And typical me, when you ask me for therapy sessions, it's not always a yes. I have to pray and ask God if I'm the right therapist for you. So I started praying for Michael before I met him. And when I was praying for him, I had a vision of being in a red kitchen and Michael holding me from behind. I had a red kitchen, so I just thought I was being wicked, and of course I told God to forgive me, and like, this is crazy. This is a client. I don't know why I'm having such kind of thoughts. And when I showed up at Michael's door, it was on a Sunday, he opened the door. Even without saying hi, he said, I will laugh at you 10 years down the line that your first date you came into my house. In my head, I thought he actually needs therapy. So he ushered me in, and when I was going to see him again, I thought I'm going to a family man with a wife and children. So the Luya in me, I carried bread and milk and took to Michael. And I stood there waiting for the wife so that I can hand over these things. But Michael told me, I'm not married. Anyway, the first 4 hours, Michael laid down his life to me. It was very interesting. His first sentence is, I have 5 children. And so still I was in tune as a therapist, just wanting to hear about him and the children. And he never said anything about his achievements, what he does. He just told me about his struggles, his weaknesses, what he's working on for 4 hours. And then I left, and I continued to pray for him. And every time I prayed, and actually before I left, because now he doesn't have a wife, and he had served me tea, I took the cup to the kitchen. And at the sink, Michael came and hugged me from behind. And when I looked up, his kitchen was red. I freaked out. He was very apologetic. He didn't know what that meant, and I did not want to tell him. Because for me, Michael did not fit the bill. I said, after he had explained to me his struggles, whatever, in the media and all that, I thought, a Luo boy in the media, I don't have a spare heart for that. So I left and continued to pray for him. And every time I'll pray for Michael, God will keep on sending the message, he's your husband, even in the dreams. And because I was not ready to listen to that, there's also a pastor friend from Sweden who called and said, we need to talk about you getting a husband. And this is what you need to look for in a man. And literally laid down Michael's life. I struggled with God and said, no, you know me, this one, where I'm at in my life, I'm done with heartbreaks. And God asked me, choose one thing that he must have for you to say yes. So I thought, now we are talking. Because I didn't know Michael. The one thing that was very quick for me to say is he must preach. He must know the Lord. He must provide spiritual covering. He must be soaked in the word. It was in the week, and about Tuesday, Michael calls me and says, I'm preaching at All Saints Cathedral. I want to invite you to the service because I'll be doing a three-piece service, starting with the relationship between, the media and the church. I didn't have the strength. I decided to watch online, and I told God, sawa. But by saying sawa, I thought, why are you insisting on Michael? I said, God, I need to know why Michael. And his answer was simple, because I love him. I didn't know what that would mean. And 1 week after he had preached, and we met now 1 week down the line, Michael officially asked me to be his girlfriend. He was very formal about it, typical Michael. And he went on to onboard me on what it means to be his girlfriend. So he started saying, when you're my girlfriend, don't call me Mike. I'm Michael. You cannot call me babe. You cannot call me sweetheart. You cannot call me honey. So I'm like, okay, what should I call you? You ask God. For now, you can just call me Michael. So while dating, I called him my Michael. And he told me, when you agree to date me, you date my children. And one day, I'll ask you to marry me, and you'll say yes. And when you say yes, you'll be a mother to my children and to my siblings. And I said, even Jeff, because he's the eldest. And Michael said, Jeff is the biggest baby of them all. So Jeff, I'm your mommy. Yeah. So as we now started to date, which wasn't much of dating because Michael now starting his PhD. He will only see me in the evening after he's finished his classes. And God started to instruct me how to relate to him in very specific ways. One key thing he told me is, tell Michael he cannot afford to take offense. And I told him that, and he said he needed to pray to understand what that meant. And it was part of letting go of the past and moving forward in a light way. And as we started that journey, I'm not a morning person, or I never used to be a morning person. And one morning, 3 months down the line, Michael calls me around 6 a.m. And he says, so now? So I asked him, what do you mean, so now? we are doing this. Doing what? I'm marrying you in May, you choose the date. And I was like, what happened to the Luo Italian romantic man? How can you propose to me on the phone? He just laughed and that was it. And from there, he wanted to, move with speed. I could not understand back then. I didn't know that he only had 2 years to enjoy marriage. No wonder the speed he had to move. And even when Michael said that, in his head it was already clear who the best man was going to be. And so we did a Kilifi trip for approval. But before that, we had to go through spiritual vetting, and he warned me, you're going to meet a man of God, and if he says no, I'm doomed. But this one, I know he'll say yes, because he has said no before many times. And when we went to meet this special man of God, he took time, and there was a lot of silence in his presence. And Michael I had never seen him nervous before. He just sat there and waited. And I could feel in the spirit being vetted. And I prayed for peace and said, God, only your will. Dating Michael and getting married to him, it was never a thing of that, I saw Michael and had butterflies. Neither was I the type for Michael, and we discussed it openly. But having come from wilderness, God was teaching us that we are short-sighted, that we needed to follow his leading, even in choosing a spouse. I didn't know the Michael that was being shared during the tribute. It was just amazing sitting and imagining one human person who embodied all those attributes. The Michael who saved the day, the Michael who was present, the Michael who was there. I didn't know that. I didn't interact much with him, but here we were, and we got married. Michael as a husband. There's a time I was just singing, and so before we got married, and he looked at me and said, what key is that? So I teased him and said, hey, though you're teasing me, can you sing? He just laughed, only for him to sing for me that song as I walked down the aisle. He had a way of, replying to the questions that you had with evidence. And so he was an amazing husband. Michael had a presence that cannot be ignored. And I used to wonder, when we are not in the same place, why I'll miss him so terribly. There's a colleague who has seen me, at work, and I miss Michael to a point where I become dysfunctional. And we're in the same country. And so it became very common for them when they see me, like, have you called your husband? Bring the phone, we call him. He's in a meeting. And when he'll call, just his voice, and he will know where I'm at. And everything will be fine. Whenever I'll travel, he will have separation anxiety. And the kids will joke, now your husband will be moody, he'll be throwing tantrums when you're not here. There's a time they even recorded him. They see what your husband is doing when you're not here. And he was so special that the fight I had with Michael one time, I remember, is because I fueled the car. I could not understand, like, I'm helping you. That's the time he called me woman. And he said, woman, you need to understand that you're married. And I'm not asking for your help. And so faithfully, every Monday, my car will be clean and full tank. And even as we were going through this process last week, one of the things I was just worried about was if our lights go off, I have no clue how to load those tokens. our Wi-Fi went off. I had no clue, how to go through the whole process. And the Oyier boys are just there helping, figuring out how to sort those things out. It's not that I can't do them, and I did them with a lot of perfection and independence. But it's been a very interesting season that the things that God could not break off me during wilderness moment were broken off during marriage. And it's interesting that marriage is very spiritual to me, at least my experience. And I learned that dying to self is part of submission, and you cannot do it without the partnership with the Holy Spirit. And God took me through that step by step through Michael. And Michael would say something when I knew that I'm so right, and he's arguing about it and he's getting upset. And one thing I was very fast at doing is to pray, and I'll tell God, now this son of yours, that you've insisted that you love him, can you just tell him he's wrong and tell him to apologize? And God will just say, obey your husband. And so it taught me to just let go of what I'm thinking. It's not about an argument. It was a teaching that it doesn't have to be about me as a person. It has to be about submitting. And, sometimes we're very good to say, my faith is grown, I'm submitting it to God. But the truth of submission is when you go to God, at least for me, and it's not your agenda. You only say, God, I'm here, and I'm ready to implement your agenda on this matter. Even in Michael's death, if prayers will have saved Michael, we prayed. Many people prayed for Michael. But it still was a lesson for me that I was praying with my own agenda. And many times when I'll go to Michael and say, God has said, and I don't have a complete sentence, there's a time I remember he said, why can't you be like Mary? I said, what do you mean? You see, Mary, when the angel showed up and said, you'll have a child, and she didn't understand how, she asked, how will it be? So when you have an incomplete message from God, I'm not God to finish that statement or answer what you're looking for. What that did, it helped me to search more in the things I would feel, the things I would dream of, that I felt that was spirit-led, and my faith grew. And that's something that I thank Michael for, that God used him to bring that level of growth in my life. And Michael was very proud to be a husband. And he always called me my wife. And so he'll come, and sometimes, Abigail will be always saying, okay, you're about to call your wife. That's all he'll call me, my wife. And I had asked God, remember, because I was not to call him babe or honey or sweetheart. So I asked God, what should I call him? And God asked me, what did Sarah call Abraham? I said, God, you are too much. You are extra. Even you, there's no way I'm calling a human being Lord. And there was a fellowship I was attending online, and Michael was very keen to just get to know your spiritual growth, where you are at, what you're listening to. And he wanted to listen into this particular one. And the message was about marriage and what it means to call your husband Lord. I looked at him and said, Naha, is God talking to you? And I realized that, yes, it was part of submission. And what I hold on to as a wife is that I have no regrets I have no unfinished business with my husband, because I can't look back and say, I wish I did, or I wish I finished this conversation. Michael's conversation were very holistic and complete in nature. I loved Michael very much. I learned very early that his love language was touch. 99 or 98% of our presence together, I gave Michael a foot rub without fail. It didn't matter whether we fought, it didn't matter whether I was sick, it didn't matter whether I was tired or I was happy. It was my way of telling him that I love you. And every time Michael will say thank you, he never took it for granted. Every morning when he leaves or I leave, Michael will kiss me, good morning, goodbye, and he'll pray over me, and he'll pronounce a blessing over me. And when he came back home, it was one of the instructions, again from the father who loved him, told me, you have to meet him at the door every time he came home. There's this particular time he was meeting his friends, and he had called and said he'll be late. But I had never had Michael home late, so I forgot. So I sat there and waited, and it was going to midnight. I called Jeff in panic. Mike is not home. What's going to happen? And Jeff just laughed because he thought, wow, it's going only to midnight. What's the big deal? And eventually Michael came home, and he's standing there at the door beaming with a smile. He had met his schoolmate, so I guess he was so ready to tell me how it was. And I just burst out crying, and he was in shock. What happened? He said, you're late. He's like, but I told you I'll be late. And his phone had gone off. Anyways, it was just about the anointing, the grace that he carried. To me, Michael was royalty. His sense of focus, discipline, being intentional, just pouring into lives, service, and his interactions were so deep that I could only say he was royal to me. You know, growing up in the village, my dad treated me like a little princess, having been the last born. And I always thought, yeah, I'll marry a prince, literally. And God is so faithful, because Michael, my Lord, my husband, in many ways, he was a prince, he was a king, and he treated me like a princess. Him as a father, I did not need to worry about Michael as a father. His interactions with the kids, it was amazing. His presence, and every Friday we had communion, and he will check in with everyone, how their week has been, what they have struggled with, and he'll be intentional in the support that he'll give them. And he will let Davis, being the youngest, to break the bread, and we'll pass around the wine for the celebration. And I've watched him, even with Davis being the youngest, you know. When I have a date with Davis, he will come with Davis and say, you now open the door for mom, close it, and now you go. As he gets into the seat, says, as you go, take care of her. And I used to say, this is too much for his age. And Michael will say, I know what I'm doing. I didn't know that he was on a schedule. He was equally a father to me. And when I had low moments, when he's debriefing me at the end of the day, Michael will put me on his lap and ask me how the day was, because he will tell when we talk during the day that I'm feeling low, and he'll wait. And he'll take me through it with so much love and tenderness and gentleness. And when I've done something wrong, he will communicate it so straight. Say, now this one, I think you are wrong. And how to get it right, and he'll support me in those levels of decisions. He loved his siblings so dearly. We've been praying about their health, and he's been hoping that no one gets sick anymore. And it's my prayer too. It's been extremely heavy on the whole family because Michael has been a father to all of them. I've watched him when he calls for family meetings, and it's like he was preparing his journey. So over Easter Monday, we had a family lunch, all of us seated together. And after that, we had family prayers. And I remember the family prayers, Michael was agitated. And he said, we have to remember we need to be there for each other. We have to keep the tradition. We have to come out of our high horses and be able to share our challenges as family and be there for each other so that we don't have crisis. So later on, I asked him, what was going on? You seemed a bit harsh. And he said, we don't have much time. We need to pull together. And so I go back and ask Michael, I couldn't understand why the short time. And I still don't have the answer. And I have no doubt it's going to be a difficult journey. But if I were to ask Mike, he'll tell me, though he slay me, but yet I will trust in him. Because I do not walk alone. God, who wanted Michael to be happy, is the same God that I trusted. I hang on some of the statements Michael said in these last 2 years. We were having breakfast and he said, the last time I was this happy, I was in high school. It meant so much to me. So much. And another time we were just playing around, the kids were making a lot of noise, and he enjoyed the noise of the children. And he said, my wife, I feel restored. And those are the words that I will hang on to. Thank you.
Let's just stand and celebrate Dina, please. Let's just stand and celebrate Dina. What a wonderful tribute. What an amazing tribute. Thank you, Dina.